좋아해?
테슬라의 금감상 내 엄마녀를 세워라 찾잖아.
Itu titik amla kuji pun nai.
마란조 지든 소백이 조가나리아 아니 주노 컨스템블 중부초기 소레제레기 니모 케바진 마란조리아 아니 망저기 망도 도시제 소레제레기 아니 당한테 너무 중주되니 거래 제거기 통변소리아 아니 라데 컨저베티브 엔비 제네 간네죠 아가나시기 아니 마란조 어르알리여기 CDC기 아니 인지 저 아가나시기 아니 반대견주기 대다 아니 근데 지금 수로만 말해 아가나시기 아니 서로기부가기 내내 나도 아니 이마 창말이야 예 우리 달랑아도 강조제 내린다 우리 주민 소백이 물레 상회 설수 때 당도 첨부해서 내주의
Next, we have speech by Honorable Chief Guest, Member of Parliament, Kenneth Guinness. Please welcome Mr. Guinness.
Elect, good morning everyone. It's an honor to be with you today on Tibetan Democracy Day when we celebrate, I think, 62 years since the beginning of democracy for Tibetans. I wanted to start by saying a few words about the occupation and some of the work that's going on in the Canadian Parliament in response to the occupation. And then I want to share some reflections about Tibetan democracy and how it's practiced. Of course, we continue to be horrified by the human rights violations that are associated with the ongoing occupation of Tibet, human rights violations that are, if anything, escalated in terms of their seriousness and severity. And members of Parliament continue to raise these issues of human rights violations and call for a political solution. And that is why I put before the Foreign Affairs Committee a motion that was unanimously adopted that called for dialogue towards the establishment of and implementation of the middle way approach, that is genuine autonomy for Tibet within the framework of the Chinese Constitution. That motion was adopted at the Foreign Affairs Committee and referred to the House of Commons. And our hope is that this fall, that motion will be concurred in by the House of Commons. Effectively, that means that the House of Commons in its entirety, including the government, will say we agree with that motion. We will be pushing forward with efforts to bring about that concurrence, and I hope it will succeed. Your continuing advocacy around that motion, around the recognition of the middle way and calls for dialogue is very important. And I encourage you to hold your elected politicians' feet to the fire. It is nice for them to come to events and to celebrate with you and to celebrate culture, but it is not enough. You need your elected members of Parliament to be standing up for justice, to be challenging the government of China. Being for Tibet has to mean opposing the violence being committed by the CCP, and that's really where the rubber hits the road. And I want to especially, I know there are many leaders in the Tibetan community doing great work. I especially want to recognize Sharap, who I know is speaking after me, for his incredible advocacy towards this end. One of the other issues that we continue to be engaged on is bringing back the Special Committee on Canada-China relations. It was a conservative motion opposed by the government, but we were able to get a majority to vote in support of that motion. Now the Special Committee on Canada-China relations is back, and one of the first issues that committee will tackle is concerns about foreign interference here in Canada. We see this hurting the Tibetan diaspora community and many other communities and individuals who are involved in advocacy for justice and human rights, for countering the violence of the Chinese Communist Party. They face threats, intimidation, other kinds of limitations. We see efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to control elites. We see when people of Chinese origin try to speak out about their own concerns about human rights issues, how they can sometimes face violence and intimidation. So this is a critical issue as well that I'm working on, that we need to work on, which is interference by the Chinese Communist Party and sometimes by other foreign actors right here in Canada. But the main thing we're here today is to speak about and celebrate Tibetan democracy. And I have, as I've gotten to know the Tibetan people, the Tibetan institutions, been so impressed by how this experience of democracy has worked and unfolded over the last 60 plus years. Of course, democracy is important anywhere because it reflects the fundamental right of all people to choose their own government. It reflects the fact that people have I believe, God-given right to shape their own future, and that includes choosing their own leaders. In the particular context of the occupation, the Tibetan democracy does a number of other things. It demonstrates the readiness of the Tibetan people to govern themselves. Very often, the arguments used by anti-democrats is to say, well, democracy couldn't work here, people aren't ready for democracy, democracy isn't compatible with this area. And we see that argument being used, for instance, attempted to be used by the Chinese Communist Party. But the existence of democratic institutions within the diaspora, fully functioning, bringing people together, balancing the tensions that exist, this powerfully demonstrates that Tibetans and that Tibet is ready for that democracy. So we want to see the transition as quickly as possible to the genuine autonomy that Tibetans are calling for, and the existence already of democracy, of democratic institutions, proves that readiness. Of course, it also means when we have these democratic institutions, it prepares Tibet for a smooth transition. It prepares Tibet for when the political circumstances are right, when you're able to see that negotiation towards the establishment of a middle way approach. These institutions are able to jump in and play that role, facilitating that transition. And the final thing I'll say about Tibetan democratic institutions that I think is so important is the continuity with long-standing Tibetan cultural and faith traditions. Now, in some places, most notably in the case of the French Revolution, we saw how democracy was associated with the destruction of everything that came before and a great deal of violence. And that's not the best way to proceed. Instead, what we've seen with Tibetans, and more similar, I think, to the kind of British and Canadian systems of democratic evolution, is that you had traditional systems of authority that were supporting and promoting the idea of democracy, that allowed democratic structures to really stand on the shoulders of the existing traditions and structures that had been in place. So the continuity that existed as a result of His Holiness the Dalai Lama endorsing and pushing forward the democratic project, I believe is so important, has allowed for the development of strong, vibrant democratic institutions that align with and build on and respect the long-standing traditions of authority and politics that have existed within the Tibetan community. So these are many examples, really, of ideal features of Tibetan democracy and the particular function of democracy in the context that Tibet faces. And I think there is so much that other people groups and communities and places that face oppression can really learn from the democratic experience of Tibet. I do a lot of advocacy for democracy, for justice, and for human rights involving other communities as well. But very often I find myself referring to things that the Tibetan community has done. And I've been at different events where it's been beautiful to see the sharing of information that happens. I recall in particular speaking at a conference in Geneva, and the previous Sikyong being able to speak with leaders in Taiwan, in Hong Kong facing really escalating oppression from the Chinese Communist Party as well, and how previous Sikyong was able to just share with these Hong Kong leaders. These are some of the things we've done that may be applicable in your circumstances. So this is part of the democratic experience of Tibet as well, is that sharing that can take place in Canada and other places of your experience. And I can assure you of my continuing commitment, and certainly I can speak on behalf of my Conservative Party as well, that we're deeply committed to defending democracy, human rights, and justice in every part of the world, and standing with the Tibetan community in pursuing this effort in Parliament to push back against the ongoing violence that we're seeing, to call for dialogue towards the establishment of a middle way approach, to seek to counter foreign interference, and indeed to celebrate the great features of Tibetan democracy. Thank you for this opportunity to be with you today, to speak to you, and I encourage you to continue your work and your advocacy, to look for ways to get involved, to hold your leaders accountable, and to always challenge them to do more in support of Tibet. Thank you very much. God bless.
Shilla diji resha denta.
This way.
khala lo muchu khala pe ya bodu ngamari sa dai me mangbo yor sim za ya ngalik din la khala kin sho la ba khala sho ge sue ba mi ya mangbo yor sim za mi min do yo min do le dia cha ge movie kha cha ya wo pe su shi ya nga yo mi chu shur sa on de emotional yo cha si ya shi movie di youtube na lu ra no pe wo da mi pe ta charish ah Timasa. 딱다로. 로사 되어지 직되는 맛이야. 나래. 그래. 근데 아저기 무비 제타 비치 릴리즈 하러 했었다 유튜브 가나. 왜 내가 네가 저기 얘도 페퍼기 네가 와 팩트 가나 무비 스위샤. 무비 빼고도 나빼 걸어 이모셔널 빼쳐서 근데 이 모델이야 이씨. 빼 무브 샷사야. 이모셔널 셈바직 차 되더라. 딱딱을 아주 좀 반이 되죠 무비. 무비 제전 반이 되죠. 빼고도 무비 아자 땡큐. 야고 빼스셔.
근데 때와지라 캐나다 슝이라 그거 먹물로 같이 보라.
네.
데일리니라 안주 컨디션.
네.
이게 미라라 시리즌십 때나 그거미 가르치고 있어. 아야.
네, 그러면
만두 상물라고 상물 티베탄 이탈리안 수수랑 먹을 랑이지라. 아니 애트리스 근데도 오지 미리 심바진지 다 보내라. 아니
빼고
내가 이야기 내가 저희가
네.
그거 미라에 이게 되게 말했어. 가르모 가르치나 스스가 소화된다라 야갑들라 페인트를 마시내기 말해라. 언제 쳐도 제가
어디 야고pe도 어디 무비디 아주 정말 릴리처리샤 시자다 정말도야. 아니다. 어다데. 실라 정말. আমলা গিয়ে কাছে ভিডিও তো আছে নাগর ফল গিয়া আলে দাঙ্গো শিনিল লইদা তো দি আজ খালা ইয়াও পে সিরতা উনো হলা খালা ইয়াও শিমু সির উনসু আজ তা দিরে খালা হরে খালা পে সিকিও রে উনো হরে সিকিও মানে আজ খালা পে শিমুরিস আন্দে ভিডিও পার মারতা ভিডিও রাজা 먼저 된지 다시 내려다. 다른 망서 오니 왜? 이제 당장 소지 신사스. 다 상마 갈아도는 단단히 오셔야 된다. 내가 membership 되면서 membership 로니라고 뭐 있어야 되셔. 아니 membership 수행인데 수나 약보래 온라인 라 수나 요래 membership 수행 바가 가지만 직 수행이라 온데 제로 찾아서 expired 찾아래 니 투라